Well, this card is actually bigger than I thought. Oh, and that is embarrassing. Yeah, kinda like having 5 centimeters extra of air at the tip of your condom. Embarrassing. How's it going, everyone? My name is MindBlank and welcome back to my channel, where today I decided to get a little weird and apparently compare all the wrong stuff. Notice that I said apparently, and you will soon find out why. We are actually getting closer and closer to NVIDIA Pascal and AMD Polaris release dates. Actually, we are waiting on something from the NVIDIA side today being the 7th of May. But this is surely not the end of the Maxwell generation, and it will prove to be ever so enticing for those of you wanting to upgrade. So that is why today we are comparing the GTX 750 Ti to the GTX 970. So you might be wondering, who in their right mind would actually compare a GTX 750 Ti to a GTX 970? Well, is it performance we are comparing over here? No, surely not. The GTX 970 is 2 or maybe 3 times faster than the GTX 750 Ti. So what exactly am I trying to prove here? What am I looking for in this comparison? Well, I'm looking to show you guys, since the GTX 970 prices are dropping, what would that extra $200, and I'm referring to the used market here because there's still a $200 gap between the 750 Ti and the GTX 970, what that $200 gap would actually bring you, not in performance but actually in image quality, if you decide to upgrade from a 750 Ti to the said 970. Actually, both cards carry the price to performance crown in their categories. So the 750 Ti, well, its category is the entry level enthusiast. Is there even such a thing? Well, apparently there is. So the entry level enthusiast, the 750 Ti, because it's the crown king of that category, is the 30 FPS 1080p console equivalent settings, so to say, graphics card. So which category is the GTX 970 belonging to? Well, the GTX 970 is still the 1080p category, but it's the 60 FPS mostly maxed out. And I say mostly maxed out because recent titles actually seem to do worse and worse on the GTX 970, and not warranted, to be honest. And I'm looking at the Division here in particular because it's running well below 60 FPS and the visuals are not nearly as good as someone would expect. I want to find out, can the 750 Ti actually still perform at a reasonable 30 FPS if you're still using console equivalent settings, of course at 1080p? And can the GTX 970 actually bring anything worthwhile in the image quality department to justify that extra $200? Well, we are not going to go pixel peeping, we are not going to look at still images, we are going to look at games running, benchmarks running, with settings tuned so that the GTX 750 Ti will run at a mostly 30 FPS average, and the GTX 970 running at a mostly 60 FPS average. So, if you're the kind of person that can actually handle 30 FPS, lock 30 FPS and not be minded by the performance, then the GTX 750 Ti might still be a very relevant choice for you. But if you're convinced that 60 FPS is where it's at, then of course the GTX 970 is still hard to beat. We're waiting on a GTX 1070 or the GTX 1080. But it's still and will continue to be a very, very nice choice. Just don't expect your world to actually be rocked, and here is why. We have both cards overclocked because there's just no point in missing out on that. Both are excellent overclockers, and do notice that I did not go overboard with the clocks. Actually, these are pretty mild overclocks, albeit applied over the factory OC that both of these cards have. Sadly, the GTX 750 Ti is power limit throttling, as this model does not have an extra PCIe connector, power connector, and so it hits the PCIe slot maximum supplied wattage. This is why the GPU clock is fluctuating from I think around 1360 all the way up to 1410, 1420 megahertz. So right now we are running Far Cry Primal built-in benchmark with the necessary settings in order to achieve that 30 FPS for the GTX 750 Ti and that 60 FPS for the GTX 970. So we are running a custom medium high with some ultra settings on the GTX 750 Ti and straight up ultra settings on the GTX 970. Look at how close everything looks between the two, even though there is a rather hefty gap in settings. I am not pixel peeping, as I said, and no, it's not the YouTube compression making everything look the same, trust me. Moving on to Rise of the Tomb Raider, a real looker but eats GPUs for breakfast. Settings are a notch down from Ultra on the GTX 970, especially texture resolution and I think some shadow settings. The GTX 750 Ti needs a lot of settings put to medium in order to get that 30 FPS. Well, medium or on, cause that's what they're called in this game. And that's with the overclock, bear that in mind. But look at that, even though we are comparing such a large difference in visual settings, look at the images, very close to one another, and you can't easily tell which is which if you're not intently looking for it. However, that close to 60 FPS average on the GTX 970 is just heaven if you're playing this game with a keyboard and mouse. Witcher 3, beautiful looking game, very hard on performance, but the GTX 750 Ti manages well above 30 FPS while running console equivalent settings. The GTX 970 is running everything on Ultra except shadows, which are on high, and of course no hairworks, a real performance killer. Only way of getting 60 FPS with this card while overclocked. Again, a hefty difference between visual settings between the two cards, but look at that! Things look so similar. I have to admit that 60 FPS though on the GTX 970 is really enticing. I am hard pressed to find huge differences in visual quality here though. And we are looking at Fallout 4 now. Not the greatest looking game, but it doesn't look half bad in my opinion. Settings are high preset for the GTX 750 Ti and ultra preset for the 970. Sadly, this game is kept at 60 FPS or we would have seen the 970 really pulling ahead here. So great performance from the GTX 750 Ti, and again a rather large jump in quality, especially in viewing distances of shadows and details. The sliders for the 750 Ti were well below the half point. But that is all on paper at this stage, cause look at the similarities between these two. There are no major differences or missing effects or blurry textures, so on and so forth. Last but definitely not least, the almighty GTA 5, a game which is superbly ported and optimized for the PC. Unless I would really crank settings up for the GTX 750 Ti like anti-aliasing or extended viewing distances, the performance is well above 30 FPS. This is why for this title I switched to 45 FPS and 90 FPS averages for the GTX 750 Ti and the GTX 970, because both cards were doing so well. Over here we are running almost identical settings, since the game, like I said, is so awesomely optimized. That is why, even if you were looking very closely, you would be very hard pressed to find any differences between the two. Why test this title then, since there isn't such a large difference in the settings between the two cards? Well, I did it to show you guys that a GTX 750 Ti can offer well above the console, meaning PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, performance and visuals in some games. So, jumping to a GTX 970 in GTA 5 is solely for those awesome high frame rates and buttery smooth gameplay. In conclusion, everyone, I'm not trying to feed you info, I'm just showing you some stuff that not a lot of people have thought about. I'm not saying stick with your GTX 750 Ti, and I'm not saying drop that $200 or so extra dollars for a used GTX 970, especially if you're the type of person that enjoys playing from your couch on your big screen TV, where that 30 FPS frame rate is actually very nice and enjoyable. Make your own mind up. I did this since I was always disappointed when I jumped 1, 2, 3 or however many levels above my current GPU. I dropped serious cash and stuff looks nearly identical, although the new card let me enable a ton more options in the menus. And this is a problem with recent titles, recent games, recent meaning in the recent years, that there is not a lot of difference between medium, high and ultra settings. Thank you for watching this video, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up. Please do comment and give me your thoughts, and see you next time. Bye bye.